Welcome back, everybody. We have our friend John McGarr here with us this morning from Canadian American Legion, and we are talking about the headstone dedication this weekend for a Civil War veteran and Buffalo soldier who settled in Canadian. Okay, John, thanks so much for being here this morning.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Now, this is an amazing story that you all, amazing deal that you're doing, but an amazing story of this gentleman, Frank Clark. Tell us a little bit more about Frank.
Frank Clark was born into slavery in Louisiana in roughly, we really don't know, in sometime in the mid-1840s. He was a slave until the Union Army freed him when they took control of the Mississippi. After he got his freedom, he enlisted in the United States Army in the 80th U.S. Colored Infantry. After the war was over, he then proceeded to enlist in the 9th Cavalry, which is one of the 4 all-black military units that were formed after the Civil War, and was then sent, with the 9th Cavalry was then sent to the Rio Grande, where they were stationed at Fort Clark. They helped immigrants that were traveling to El Paso and skirmished with the Indians and stuff like that. He stayed in the Army and was discharged and ended up coming to Fort Elliott, which is where Mobedia roughly is now. And there he met Cap Arrington. Arrington was the famous Texas Ranger, and by that time he had gotten out of the law enforcement business and had started a ranch. Clark worked for him for 5 or 6 years as a cook. He also worked for other area ranchers around there, but ultimately he moved into Canadian and went to work there. By then, he was in his 60s, and he moved in there and did odd jobs, and he worked as a porter at one of the local hotels. He was the only black person living in Hemphill County at that time, and he stayed there and became a very familiar figure that the community really liked him. They took care of him. He was so his time marches on, people began to take more and more care of him. And he was ultimately died in October of 1922. So he was nearly 80 at that point, as best we can tell. The last person to see him was Cap Arrington. Well, see him alive. And the interesting thing about Arrington is that he was a hardcore Civil War Confederate soldier. He fought at the First Battle of Manassas, at Antietam, at Gettysburg. He rode with Jeb Stuart. He would be absolutely the opposite person you would think would have a relationship, but yet over time, and I suspect probably because of the fact that they were both working on the frontier of Texas at the same time. I don't know it, but I'm surmised they perhaps knew of each other, and he came back here. But time goes on, and they formed a different sort of relationship. At the end, towards the end of his life, another family appears that's extremely important in Hemphill County, and that's the Abraham family. They had immigrated from what is now Lebanon into the United States and settled in Canadian and started a dry goods store. They were in an odd situation because they weren't Hispanic, but they weren't Anglo either, as far as the community was concerned. So they were neither fish nor fowl, but they were there, and it took a number of years for them to be fully accepted. At any rate, while they were there, as Clark was getting older, the Abraham family began to take care of him and made sure that he had the things that he needed. And when he died, that should have been the end of the story, but there was this, there were 40 cars, this is 1922, 40 cars in the entourage that went to the Edith Forum Cemetery where he's buried. That should have been the end of the story, but there was no marker there. Mrs. Abraham.
And this is what y'all are doing this weekend?
Yes, there was we don't know if she did it herself, by herself, or if she had other help, but they purchased a headstone and put it on that grave, because the write-up in the paper at the time was what you would expect of a paper in Texas at that time, but it was just like, he was such a wonderful guy, the community loved him. He was a stellar example of his race, is the way they phrased it. And so the marker was there, but the problem was It just had his name on it and his dates. It did not have the fact that he was a veteran. So we are going to, that's what we're going to do on Saturday, is we have purchased a new headstone that very clearly denotes the fact that he was a veteran and a soldier, and to correct that mistake.
Okay. Now, I do have to cut it short, but give me a time and a place.
Edith Ford Cemetery, Canadian, Texas, 10 a.m. Saturday morning.
Yes, sir. All right, John McGarr, I wish we had more time because this is an amazing story.
It really is.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And for more information, you know where to go, myhighplains.com.